A major threat to your safety and security already exists here in the United States of America. And if we find ourselves in a hot conflict with China, it will activate. And of course, the likelihood of a hot conflict with China is becoming greater every single day. How great, you ask? Well, I can tell you that right now, China is warning of a counterattack if the president of Taiwan is to meet with Speaker of the House Kevin McCarthy on April 5th in Los Angeles. So there's a lot of reasons to believe that at some point in time we'll find ourselves in a conflict with China. But that's not necessarily the direct risk that we all face here in the United States right this second. And this is a very organized, well-funded, and prepared group of different entities that we need to be completely ready for if this ever happens. And when that switch gets flipped, you will definitely find out about it. Now, before we get right into exactly what I'm talking about, I want you to understand that yes, China has a lot of threats that are basically overt at this point here in the country already. And what I'm talking about is their Ministry of State Security, which is basically their FBI plus CIA type organization, right? And the Ministry of State Security has a lot of different espionage style operations occurring here in the country on a regular basis. They're involved with things like political corruption, which is pretty obvious at this point in time. They're also involved with infiltrating our education system, and there's a lot of evidence of that. And they're involved with infiltrating activist groups, especially groups that might be, let's just say, against some of the things that China has been up to, all right? We also know about their secret police and their police stations that exist around the United States. And even though we're aware of these activities and those police stations, somehow they still continue to exist. So I'm not in charge and I can't fix that problem necessarily, but I can tell you that they have a very strong hold over what it is that they're doing here in the country already. But that's not necessarily the direct threat. There is a major threat, and I'm talking about an armed and violent threat that you have to be prepared for to face if things really do fall apart and we find ourselves in a war with China at some point in time, which, like I said, is becoming more likely. We have all the evidence leading up to even what I just pointed to at the beginning of the video for you to understand that that is becoming more and more of a reality, okay? So, listen, their biggest operational threat, the operation that they're running here in this country right now that brings the biggest threat to you and your family is their involvement with Mexican drug cartels, which I think we can all agree are extremely dangerous. Now, a lot of you might not realize that China is very involved with Mexico's illegal activities, especially when it comes to the organized crime aspect. And this is something that you need to pay attention to because the cartels are not just haphazard groups that don't really have it together when it comes to being able to accomplish a task. These are well-organized, well-funded, well-trained, and well-armed groups. And yes, it's not just one cartel. There are many, many cartels, and they're all part of this puzzle that China has put together to sow instability here in the United States of America. And this is why you need to pay attention to this, because if we go to war with China, they will use the resources they have to try to create chaos and instability here in the United States to weaken our ability to respond to that conflict, all right? Now, what do I mean by this exactly? Well, first off, if you're worried about trying to prepare yourself and your family for whatever might happen in the future, especially regarding threats that exist here in the country already, then make sure you hit the subscribe button below, which I did differently because I wanted to throw you off, because that's the kind of stuff we talk about on this channel, and my goal is to try to get everybody prepared for whatever scenario we might face. And there's a lot of evidence for why this could be a realistic scenario that you need to pay attention to, okay? Understand that China's MSS, right, or their Ministry of State Security, offers a lot of things to the cartels, but they don't necessarily tell them what to do. They're not necessarily in charge of them, but they collaborate and they work together and they provide each other with the things that are required in the sense of having that relationship. And the things that the MSS provides these cartels with include guidance and resources when it comes to being successful in their operations. And of course, some of those resources could lead to the developments of things like fentanyl, and some of that guidance can lead to how they assist in money laundering operations. And all these things are well documented, and there's lots of evidence that this is a alliance in many ways between two large entities that are very militaristic in behavior and style, okay? Understand that the whole goal for why China would be operating with these cartels it would easily be written off as being financial, right? Because, well, everybody's got money to make and there's lots of money in the drug trade and everything else that cartels are involved in. So China's just trying to capitalize on that additional funding, right? Do you think that China needs more money when it comes to how much they control in the sense of worldwide manufacturing at this point in time and everything else they're involved in? It's not necessarily monetarily driven. Their goal is to destabilize the United States. And one of the best ways to do that is use a local entity like Mexican cartels, who are already well established in the country and have home bases right on the other side of the border where there's a lot less regulation for these operations to occur, right? The destabilization goal has a few different reasons behind it. But one of the main reasons is that if things become destabilized, aka more dangerous, and let's just say more like a without rule of law scenario, it takes resources away from some of the other stuff we would maybe need to be paying attention to. And when I say that, keep in mind things like some of the riots that you've seen in the past when it comes to our major cities. Well, how much was spent in the sense of resources in trying to control those riots? And how many police were involved in trying to get everything under control? And what kind of a response was required because of everything regarding that type of behavior, right? Understand that every resource spent to try to prevent or to control those types of situations is one additional resource that has to be taken away from somewhere else. We don't have an infinite supply. And in fact, when you want to talk militarily, we are very behind on our recruiting goals, which means every single person that gets used towards one thing is no longer able to assist in another, okay? So the chaos that is developed through this destabilization, which I think you can understand that the drug trade, as well as trafficking, as well as everything else that the cartels are involved in, especially when it comes to violent crime, is very much able to destabilize a region, right? Not to mention the fact that somebody's funding some of the things that have been going on around here, and you have to question exactly who that might be, right? Well, the chaos removes law enforcement and military capabilities because they don't have the bandwidth to try to maintain law and order all over the country at the same time while also dealing with foreign threats. And this is why this is such a big deal, because if we go to war with China, their goal is going to be to try to eliminate the gap in power that we have against them, right? Right now, the United States has more capability than China when it comes to our militaries, right? So if China can make us spend resources somewhere else, that gap suddenly becomes closer and closer and closer because this military's resources are being spent in other places that it didn't anticipate, while this military is trying to accomplish their goal that they knew they would be basically try to be persuaded from, right? So this is all going to happen. And as of right now, everything that's happening with these cartels here in the country is subversive, right? These are covert tactics that are being used to try to sow this chaos and this destabilization in order to deplete us and to weaken us as a country. But there is a real kinetic threat to you in your local area based on these cartels if we actually go hot with China, okay? This is a real thing that I want you to understand. When we talk about training and tactics and firearms and equipment and body armor and night vision and all these things, it can sound like we're just spending crazy money and wasting time on stuff that doesn't matter because the biggest things we really need is food and water, which is still true. However, these things, these threats really do exist. And there is a reason why you might need some of this equipment if all of this stuff unfolds in the way that it could easily unfold, okay? So, right now they're using subversive tactics. They're covert. However, they're also planting collaborators everywhere, okay? In your local government, in your local police, in the military, there are collaborators from these cartels infiltrating every facet of what you consider to be the structure we currently rely on, right? And of course, these cartels owe quite a bit to China, and the MSS over there, right? So all these things are being put into place right now. And as of now, according to the DEA, there's a heavy presence of cartels within 60 major US cities. 60. And some of them you might not even expect, right? Like Salt Lake City, Boise, Idaho, Memphis, Tennessee. There's a lot of cities that you might not have expected there to be heavy cartel activity in, but there certainly is. And why is it not as expected? Because they're doing everything through subversion and covertly. So we're not very aware of it. It's not overt and in front of our face right this second. However, that can change in an instant. And understand that if we go to war with China, it will change in an instant because these pieces are already set up on this chessboard for them to checkmate us when that time comes, which is why you, as someone who wants to remain free and not under the control of somebody who makes horrible decisions, needs to be prepared for this scenario, okay? We're already invaded. We're already invaded. We don't necessarily need to see the Red Dawn scenario, which, don't get me wrong, even though the chances are very low, it's still possible. But it's not necessary any longer. A foreign occupation isn't necessary any longer. We're already invaded because of this collaboration between China and the cartels. And the cartels are already here operating in 60 major US cities with impunity. Okay? So, understand that we're invaded. And if this war goes hot, that invasion will become very obvious very suddenly. All right? What will they do? And why do you need to prepare for this? Because this is important. You need to pay attention to this. Understand that maybe you're in one of these 60 US cities, and I flashed that image of the map up so you could see it. So make sure you go back and check that out if you want to make sure, whether or not you're in proximity to one of those cities. But if we go to war with China and those cartels are told to activate, what should you expect? What's a possibility that you have to be prepared for, especially when we're talking about things like gear and equipment and everything else? Because why are we talking about that? These cartels will use violence at a local level to gain control of an area that has strategic value. And that is something that you have to be prepared for right now. And they are well armed. And they show it off. Armored vehicles, night vision, drones, helicopters, well-armed men that are well-trained, that are wearing body armor and have everything that you would expect from a military, except for they work for a cartel. This is really a thing. And they're ready for this. And to be honest with you, from people who have more knowledge on this type of scenario than I do, my understanding is that they already believe they're at war with the United States. That's their mindset. That they feel that we are a problem that they have to deal with at some point, which is where a lot of this collaboration comes from. Now, they're going to control places that have desirable features and strategic value. Do you have that in your local area? First off, are you in proximity of any of those 60 major metropolitan areas? Second off, does your local area have anything of strategic value that they might target, okay? What are they going to look for? Well, they need a large sales market for a lot of the activities they are already engaged in, right? So they're going to want a marketplace in the sense of a large population. But they also need ways to keep that market flowing when that time comes, right? So they're going to need the necessary roadways or bridges that get them to and from strategic areas. They're also probably going to target places that lots of people might frequent in order to implement more control in those areas, right? And now here's the part you really have to be concerned about, is that when this happens, they're going to know exactly what they have to do to seize that level of control. And if you don't believe that this can happen, understand that in Mexico, it's happened many, many times where a small force of cartel members can literally take an entire town over. Not because they have overwhelming force or numbers, because they showed up and handled who they had to take care of in order to make that move work. And then they put fear into the eyes of those who were around them and made it so they did not want to argue with the situation, right? So the first thing we would probably do when they try to seize an area, because maybe you're in a small town that has strategic resources. Maybe you're somewhere that has access to an important transportation hub or whatever it is, right? These are things you have to consider knowing that these things exist and are already planned against you, okay? Now, the first thing they're going to do when they come into a town is become the police, right? And you can speculate on how they would accomplish that goal. But that's the first thing they're going to do. They're going to become the police, right? All right, so from there, they're going to use threats in order to keep the order, right? And it's going to happen immediately in the sense of the police are no longer there. They are the police now, aka they're the authority in your area, and they're going to use whatever tactics necessary to maintain order over the population there, right? However they do that is for you to speculate on. And understand, this is all something that can happen. Like this has literally happened before. But the main thing you need to take away from this is that they're well armed, they're well trained, they're already here. This is all planned and ready to go if there is a hot conflict with China, because they will use them to destabilize our country, which makes our military and our law enforcement have less resources to deal with the Chinese conflict that's occurring. And in that situation, they will use these cartels to then seize strategic areas of value in order to weaken us even further, which then closes that gap of conflict even closer, right? And understand that if you're in a small locale or if you're in a major metropolitan area and this happens to you and the cartel seizes control over your area, the only way to keep that from happening and the only way to deal with that before you literally become defeated is to take immediate action. Immediate action is the only way to ensure that you don't find yourself dealing with whatever a cartel wants you to deal with. It's the only way to find yourself free after everything is said and done. Because I'm pretty sure it's well documented what cartels do to people that they don't agree with or cause them problems. And so you have to understand that you can comply all you want with whatever their demands are, and that still might not protect you or your family. So the only way to deal with these situations is with immediate action, which is why you need to be prepared for these things. Now look, the biggest supporter of the channel is Midway USA, and they obviously help me prepare, especially when it comes to a lot of those things that we previously talked about, and especially considering the fact that these cartels have things like body armor and night vision and firearms and self-defense equipment and everything else that would be related to what it is they would need to seize an area. Well, that's why we need access to that type of equipment as well. So a big thank you to Midway USA for supporting the channel and for making me more prepared for this possibility. Now, I might seem a little worked up about this whole thing, but that's because the more you research this stuff and the more you talk to people who have more knowledge about it than you do, the more you realize that this is a real scenario that can unfold the second we hit that button, hot war with China. And I don't want to have to deal with cartels because I can tell you right now, they're not the types of groups you want to screw around with. That's just the obvious truth. So unfortunately, if you're not ready for that type of scenario to unfold, you're going to literally fold. That's all there is to it. That's it. So this is something you definitely need to consider. You need to understand that that threat is here right now. It has connections to the MSS, which is the Ministry of State Security for China. And you also have to understand that the second we go to war with China, there's a chance that this could literally just happen. And you better be ready for that thing to happen because everyone's expecting a war to seem like a war, right? Hey, China and the US are fighting navally out in the ocean all the way over there. And, you know, it's crazy and we're watching it on the news. I don't think it's going to be like that. I think there's going to be a lot more happening at home than you expected. And no, it's not going to be parachutes and it's not going to be beach landings. It's going to be stuff that's already here and ready to rock. And you underestimated the idea that these organizations are capable of these things. But like I've said many times before, the reason we need community in the preparedness community, right? Seems like a double entendre or something. But either way, the reason we need community is because there's already other groups that are well organized, well trained, well funded, well equipped, that are ready to do to you whatever they desire. And I'm not going to let them. But I can't do that by myself because I don't know if you saw the video footage I was rolling there, but there's enough of them with enough equipment that it doesn't really matter what I say by myself. But if you get a good group of people together in your community who are willing to stand up with each other to handle business with immediate action before that entire level of control is implemented, you might have a chance. Now, these things have happened before. This is really something that has occurred before, which is why you should be concerned about it, because there's evidence and examples of these exact scenarios unfolding in other parts of the world. Oh, and wait, here in the United States as well. So we've seen it happen in places like Iraq. We've seen it happen in places like Afghanistan. Anytime there's a power vacuum and destabilization, groups step in that don't necessarily have everybody's best intentions in mind, and they implement their control over certain areas. And that has happened in Iraq and Afghanistan most recently many, many times. And I think that's pretty well documented. But how about here in the United States? Well, remember Seattle and the old CHOP? Well, a group of people who are somewhat organized, maybe not well organized, and somewhat armed, maybe not well armed, but still a group of people were able to literally seize a portion of Seattle, Washington, and claim it as their own territory, and they kept law enforcement and everyone else at bay. Now, of course, some of that is political based on who was in charge at the time and how they wanted to handle the situation, but regardless, that happened here in the United States. And it could happen anywhere else just as easily, except for by groups of people who have better strategy, better planning, better training, and are much more ruthless and would not be afraid to use violence to implement their will upon the masses. That's something you should definitely consider. And look, why am I concerned about this? Because it can happen anywhere, and I don't know exactly where it would happen. What do they consider strategic value? Is it natural resources? Is it population centers? Is it transport hubs like airports or subway stations? I don't know, right? I don't know what their plans are. But I do know they have plans. I do know they are here. I do know they have the connections with China. And I do know that they are collaborating on a destabilization campaign of the United States in order to weaken us so that way they can implement whatever strategy they want in the future without interference. And I think that should concern you. And the reason I think it should concern you is because with our relationship with Taiwan, it's only a matter of time until something happens in that region, and then we'll have to see how we respond to it, and then we'll see what happens after that, right? So I wanted to bring this to your attention because I brought this up before in some previous videos where I said, hey, there's some things that are already happening here in the United States, and there's some stuff you should probably know about, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a better presentation on it as to what to expect and what it should be. And originally this video was full of data points and information from different news articles and stuff like that to kind of prove the point that a lot of these things exist and everything else. But in reality, what I just told you is more important. What I just told you about why we can't just ignore the idea of self-defense and grouping together in order to defend our community is more important because we need that. We need to be ready for that. It's just the truth, okay? So hopefully this gave you some things to think about. Hopefully you're getting more prepared for these types of scenarios. If you need things from me or you're looking for ways to support the channel, I can't say my own name lately. magicprepper.com is a great place to go. And if you want to join the Subscribe Star, there's some exclusive content there, as well as preparedness giveaways. And the giveaway for April is actually going to be pretty exciting. So just keep that in mind. A video will be coming out here soon about that particular giveaway. But I just wanted to mention those things because I try to do what I can to kind of give back to some of the community, and I try to do what I can to maintain some level of, let's just say, platform when it comes to being on the internet, because you never know when that cord might just get cut, right? Especially if you're me, because sometimes I say things, I guess. But anyway, moving on past that, anything else you need from me, you know what to do. And besides that, that's it for Magic Prepper.